Welcome back to video 3 of Print 101 at Fullerton College's Introduction to Screen Printing. We're going to talk a little bit about the types of stencils here, although I don't have great pictures for all of them. The most common one done now is the photo direct method, which I'll linger on the longest. Let's talk about a few things quickly before we get there. First off, many screen fabrics need to be treated before they're really good for printing with. You can have chemical or mechanical treatments. The chemical treatment means you've coated it or applied a chemical to it, and that can cause it to make it more readily bonded to the stencil. Mechanical treatment, like sanding or something, is actually physically roughing it up to make it work a little bit differently. Depending on what the material is, you may need to do one or both of these when you get a new screen. So stencils, knife cut. When I first started screen printing, I actually learned using knife cut stencils and a few other things along that way, where you actually take a knife and you cut out of the stencil material, and then you adhere it to the screen. So you make the stencil, then you put the stencil on the screen. They can be made out of paper, which is really hard to do because they don't survive very long. And there's also some which are more self-adhering, like water-soluble stencil and lacquer-soluble stencils. These are ones that you make somewhere else, and then either you apply water until they stick, kind of like licking a postage stamp. Oh wait, we don't do that anymore. I'm old. Licking the back of an envelope to make it close where it's moisture activated. And some are lacquer-soluble, where you use a solvent to soften it and get it to stick. But the most common now is direct stencils, also known as photo direct, where the screen itself is coated in the chemical that's going to react to light to harden. That way you're not making a stencil then applying it. You're able to just create it in situ right there on the screen. We've talked about this a little bit already in the first video, but you then expose this to a ultraviolet light source. It can be a special bed UV system, like a nice vacuum table like we have on campus. And it can also be done a bit more guerrilla. If you go here in Southern California, we have this thing called sunshine about 348 days a year. And you can put your screen in the sun. As long as you time it correctly and are really on top of your timing, you can expose that way. And you don't need any specialized equipment. You can use the most readily abundant source of light on the planet, and it will work just fine. There are a lot of people who will do very do-it-yourself, backyard, do-your-own screen printing that will use these things. Another pro tip for you, coming from the master of screen printing, Sam Caraba, who normally teaches our screen classes when we're on campus. It's also possible to go to those wash your own car places where you put in $1 and they give you the spray hose and you wash your own car. They have a pressure washer on those, and you can use that to clean out and reclaim screens, and it won't cost you very much. So it's totally possible to, without specialized equipment, still use photo direct methods and just wash it out that way. Anyways, there's also some interesting things like semi-indirect or direct indirect, where you make them, expose them, and then put them on. If you're trying to do things like process color or halftones, you need to use a better quality fabric, and you really want to do photo direct if at all possible, because it'd be very hard to expose that level of detail and then apply it to the screen. That's going to have to be a direct emulsion to do halftones. We're not going to do those in our project in this class because we need to learn the basics before we can move on to that. But anyways, you should use monofilament polyester, and it should be colored red, orange, or yellow, because those reduce the spread of ultraviolet light. If anyone is old enough to remember old late night TV, and they used to always have the infomercials coming on for the blue blocker sunglasses for night driving, you can actually use an amber colored glasses and it will block ultraviolet light, especially if they're rated for it. So you can build, since those are made out of a polymer plastic and so are silk screens, it's possible to get a screen made out of a plastic that does not spread UV light, which means that very small details, the light will never spread out through the screen itself, giving you much finer detail on exposure. Talk about the different types of presses out there. Here's a picture of a rotary. This is one of the more exciting ones. There are flatbed presses. Those are the most common ones. It's just you put the screen on top of something flat. You can print on things like t-shirts and posters. There's also cylinder presses and rotary presses, where you're able to, cylinder presses print around a cylinder. So if you want to print on water bottles, you would use a cylinder press. There's also the rotary press, which is for bigger industrial applications. You do things like wallpaper, gift wrap, textiles. In fact, a lot of patterned clothing comes this way. This is how they print camouflage, and also how they print things like Hawaiian shirts. And any sort of patterned cloth these days is printed this way. And lastly, I'll share this picture of a multi-screen, semi-automatic press, screen printing press. This is set up to print lots of things quickly. You can see there's a little palette in the front there where you put your poster or your t-shirt, and then each one of the screens going around that giant starfish prints a different color. So you want to print multiple colors for a very complex print on a very cool t-shirt. You want to print a lot of them. This is the way to go. You have to make all the screens and set them all up, but then you don't actually have to stand there and pull every single one individually. In fact, the machine pulls more regularly and more consistently than a human can. So you get a very consistent output. So if you go to like Walmart and you see the screen printed t-shirt section, and they have actually some pretty good stuff at Walmart and Target too for screen printed t-shirts for cheap. They were produced in a factory using one of these because they're able to crank them out this way quite quickly and quite regularly without very many variations. All right, guys, thanks for listening. And we'll meet again for the next chapter.